And next is going to be dARkness, named dARkness Online Book Number 1, written by Riley S. King, which is a husband and wife pen name. This is about 250 pages. I don't actually have an official page count, neither does Amazon at this point. However, the price tag is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. In the False Lands, it's either get good or die. Tanisha Richards, known as Koest in dARkness Online, isn't your typical augmented reality mobile gamer. She's a deer hunting engineer from Oregon who lives in a self-sustainable house, but drives a really inefficient truck. She also happens to be in a wheelchair. When the loot of a lifetime shows up during a potentially bugged event, Tanisha rushes into the wilderness to capitalize on some intern's mistake. She was expecting some amazing drops. What she got was dropped into the False Lands. Will Tanisha be able to survive in a reality ruled by the system in dARkness Online, or is it GG, good game? There you go. Okay, this is a trapped in a game world story with a main character that has a disability. She can't walk and uses a wheelchair in the real world. She's sent against her will to her favorite augmented reality game where she kills monsters and crafts using their parts. And that's kind of what the story is. This story definitely has more of a game-lit vibe than LitRPG, and while there are RPG elements with the main character gaining skills and levels, they don't really matter all that much to the story, but they do exist, so it is technical LitRPG. It's really never established in the game if this world has a respawn system, so the main character never loses, and not having a particular crafting skill or a very high one doesn't seem to really affect anything, which is why I say that some of the mechanics in the story don't seem to really have an impact. They just kind of exist there to show progression, and that's perfectly fine. They're totally viable, but again, they don't really have a huge impact. The other game mechanics in the story, though, are really impactful. That's why I say it's not like it's not LitRPG, it's not gamelet. It just leans a little more to the gamelet side. The are minor survivor elements a little earlier in the story. Sanity, hunger pulls to maintain, killing monster drops food and crafting components, but the big game mechanic in the story is definitely going to be the crafting, and that's definitely super detailed. Lots of descriptions about how crafting occurs, different materials used, different processes, different incremental steps to create better quality items and different kind of items, and that is probably the part that if you're going to enjoy the story, that's the part you're going to enjoy the most. In the beginning of the story, I'll be honest, crafting was kind of boring and tedious, even to the main character. I think it's part of the reason why I thought it was boring and tedious, because in the description of the story, the main character kind of has the same feeling. Crafting is not the real life realistic version, nor is it fully game-like where you're button pressing. Instead, it's something in between. It has all the tedium of real work, but none of the real challenge. And even the main character kind of describes it as going through all the motions of gathering and crafting, but the process being so simplified that she's guaranteed success, thus losing any real chance of failure or challenge. However, about 70% of the story, this shifts for the better. The main character starts to reason her way out to do things that aren't quite fully prescribed in like the descriptions, and she makes plans and she does things that aren't guaranteed to have success. And I think that's the part I like the most, just because of that aspect. Like, there was a challenge for the main character. Finally, she has to figure things out. She has to go out of her comfort zone to build a camp and to make high grade tools and store resources for a planned trip. And it was just this nice little section of, like, even the main character's same challenge. And it makes sense that it's at about the 70% mark, because that's the story point where, like, things are going to be shifting for the main character. But it's just kind of a long way to get there. And I'll admit, at this point, again, I like the story. It's just kind of a long wait to kind of get to that point. Story-wise, there isn't one, which is kind of a surprise. There's a setup of the story where the main character can't go home unless she finds some castle and confronts a mysterious them. That's all it's kind of described. It's dwelt upon at length, and I thought it was going to be a bigger part of the story, and it's just not. Instead, after a very long setup and again an intentionally boring tutorial section, it lasts up to about the 40% mark. Most of the story is really just the main character coming to terms with being trapped in a game, fighting monsters, and crafting. That's kind of it, which, again, that's not necessarily bad in and of itself for me. I like slice of life stories. I kind of thought there was just going to be more of a plot driven story based on that initial setup. Overall, I almost like this. I really did. There's a boring beginning and middle. Combat is kind of okay. Most of the focus is on crafting, which is it's kind of a plus for me, except the fact that it's described to the main character as boring, so I come across as me, the reader, also in the same light until about again the 70% mark when things shift for the better. Again, at that point, it's a very crafting, reasonable, reasoning, intelligent main character, planning and being proactive, which I really enjoyed. But then it lost me again at the ending, where everything she did doesn't seem to matter because of a thing that happens. And there really is no resolution for that big plot point that was kind of emphasized at the beginning of the story. You can tell that this is supposed to be book one in the series, and maybe other things are going to be resolved later. But for now, it just kind of felt like this was this weird, petered out ending where she's like, oh, by the way, the stuff that she just did, nope, doesn't really matter. And we're going to move on to the next book into actual plot resolution. I'm like, oh, so this just kind of ends, and it does. That's kind of the way it goes. So for me, it didn't really work. Gets a score 6 out of 10. That's dARkness, named dARkness Online book number 1, with a score of 6 out of 10.